What sets science's speed once machine time can replace years of waiting? The Energy Department just put roughly $5 billion behind 278 AI science projects. Now here's the claim I'll stand behind. Science will move at the pace we can manufacture intelligence, and human attention will stop being its clock. Come with me, let's get into it. On Wednesday, the Energy Department launched the first 278 projects in its Genesis mission. The federal government committed roughly $5 billion across the national laboratory system. The work spans grid modeling, nuclear reactor design, fusion, and quantum computing. Universities lead 168 of the different projects. National labs lead 87. The remaining 23 split between company collaborations and nonprofit programs. And that distribution is really important. This isn't one giant model sitting inside one federal lab. This is a research network that connects public supercomputers with universities, companies, and specialists across several fields. Now, back in February, the Energy Department had defined 26 AI challenges for energy. That was the blueprint. Wednesday's announcement puts the projects and the actual money behind that. The clearest example begins with one of the slowest parts of building a modern power grid. Every new solar farm, battery project, or independent generator has to pass an interconnection study before it can connect. Engineers need to know whether the grid can actually carry the new power safely and what upgrades the project will actually require. Those studies now take years. The resulting queue has become the largest choke point between new generation and the actual grid. Community solar waits there. Storage waits there. Independent generators wait there. At Brookhaven National Laboratory, Hendrik Hamman is building foundation models trained on the physics of transmission network. A foundation model in this setting learns how a grid behaves. Engineers can then ask it about a proposed connection without running the full simulation from the beginning every single time. So inside the lab, the team says the approach has compressed studies that can take years into runs that finish in minutes, describing that as a 1,000-fold speedup. Siemens Energy is contributing methods that change how power moves through the network. Those methods can help operators test different grid layouts and control choices. So let's pause on what a 1,000-fold gain really means here. The existing system makes every project wait for scarce engineering hours and repeated simulations. A working foundation model moves much of that effort onto compute. Researchers can then manufacture more study capacity by running more machines. That changes who can move through the queue. A large utility may have the staff and the money to survive years of delay, but a community project has much less room to absorb it. The administration has framed the Genesis mission as securing American leadership in science. That's the administration's account of its own goal, though, and it protects a national advantage that is being built around federal laboratories and scarce computing infrastructure. The capability underneath that framing, though, has wider uses. A faster interconnection process could help every project stuck behind the same backlog. The model doesn't care whether the applicant has a national press office or a neighborhood board. But there is a tension that I want to bring up and look at directly here. This same administration just 5 days ago moved the opposite way on another part of science. The July 18th edition of the Century Report covered National Science Foundation's new rule barring the researchers that it funds from working with hundreds of Chinese university and national labs, a flat ban that starts on October 1st. So the American leadership pouring $5 billion into national lab science, which is a very good thing, is also fencing that science off from the very collaborators who've helped produce some of the world's most cited work. Not so much of a good thing. The funding is real here, and it is worth being excited about, but the wall around it is a bet that knowledge can be kept inside one country's borders right when capability keeps proving it can't. Now, the portfolio does extend well beyond just the power grid, too. One nuclear project carries about $60 million. 3 quantum projects involve work at Argonne, Brookhaven, Lawrence Livermore, and CU Boulder. Inflection secured 3 Genesis mission projects. Matthew Kinsella has pointed to grid strain as one problem that quantum simulation could help to address. Dario Heel has described the larger direction as national-scale science infrastructure, and that gets to the real change. National lab computing has historically served a narrow group of mission problems. Access was limited by the machines and by the small number of specialists who knew how to run them. Genesis is trying to turn that supercomputing spine into a broader engine for research. The scarce thing becomes less about available human hours and more about how much useful computing capacity that the system can provide. But there is an important limit to what happened Wednesday. These are Phase 1 research demonstrations. These are not deployed services quite yet. A utility engineer can't call Brookhaven tomorrow and clear a community solar project in just minutes. The models still do need validation. Grid operators have to fit them into already existing and real workflows, and regulators have to accept their results. So a laboratory speedup proves that the underlying capability exists, but it doesn't prove when the public will receive it. And that deployment gap is now the part to watch. The mission will matter when the funded demonstrations become dependable systems that working scientists and engineers can actually use. The government has supplied money, machines, and a portfolio. The next measure is whether those inputs manufacture real scientific time. All right, shifting away from national research infrastructure, we move inside the cell. Here, several limits that once fell years apart moved on just Monday and Wednesday. Gene editing faces 4 linked problems. Scientists need to insert enough DNA, they need to edit the intended target without damaging the nearby material, they need to fit the editor into a delivery vehicle, and then the edit has to actually produce the useful biological effect. Papers published on Monday and Wednesday advanced that whole stack. So let's start with the payload. A team led by Tsinghua University introduced an editing method called KNIT, K-N-I-T. It can insert DNA fragments ranging from under 1 kilobase to more than 10. And the striking part is how it makes the insertion. Conventional CRISPR often cuts both strands of the DNA helix, and the cell then repairs that break while scientists try to introduce the desired change, which is very difficult to do. Cutting both strands can also produce deletions and chromosome rearrangements. That collateral damage has made large insertions especially risky. KNIT uses an enzyme that nicks only 1 strand. Another part of the system recruits the donor DNA to the site. The team reported efficiencies as high as 89% while sharply reducing unintended edits. And then it tested the method on cancer-fighting immune cells. CAR T cells are the T cells that are reprogrammed to recognize and attack cancer. Scientists commonly use viruses to place the new instructions inside them. KNIT built CAR T cells without viruses and without breaking both DNA strands. Those engineered cells cleared tumors in mice. So that advances payload and therapeutic effect together. Now, the second paper tackles precision. Researchers at Peking University built ContactSeek. It feeds possible off-target DNA sequences into AlphaFold 3, DeepMind's AI for predicting molecular structure and interactions. The team found that AlphaFold 3's full 3-dimensional structures weren't the most useful signal. The predicted points of contact between the editing enzyme and the DNA carried more information. Tiny shifts in how the enzyme actually grips the DNA can separate an accurate edit from a stray one. So we are talking about distances smaller than a 10/1000th of a meter. ContactSeek detected those shifts, and the resulting editor variant outperformed several established high-fidelity editors. That's a subtle and important use of AI. The model isn't merely drawing a protein for researchers to admire, obviously. It's reading the contact pattern closely enough to guide a safer molecular design. Now, the third advance concerns delivery. Many gene editors are too large to fit inside adeno-associated virus, or AAV. These viruses are the common delivery vehicles for gene therapy, but they have a very strict size limit. Researchers at Westlake University used protein language models to optimize compact zinc finger proteins, and that let them shrink an editor enough to fit inside one of these AAV vectors. They aimed it at a spinal muscular atrophy, a genetic disease caused by a splicing defect. One injection corrected that defect and improved the disease in mice. The July 17th edition covered AI-designed synthetic CRISPR enzymes from the Doudna lab. Those compact proteins outperformed natural editors while moving toward easier delivery. These papers continue that turn. AI has moved from reading biology toward changing the conditions under which biological editing begins. Payload, precision, delivery, and therapeutic effect all advanced within days of one another. Research used to meet these constraints just one at a time. Progress at one layer could then have to wait years for another layer to catch up. But now, the whole stack is moving in parallel. None of these systems is a therapy, of course, that a patient can receive today. The tumor result and the spinal muscular atrophy result came from mice. Researchers still have to test safety, durability, dosing, manufacturing, and clinical benefit in people. The tools have moved ahead, though. Translation now sets the pace. That's still a profound change. Each demonstrated capability brings the deliverable treatment closer, even if it doesn't place that treatment in the clinic tomorrow. All right, shifting to the next story here. Those biological systems became useful partly because researchers could redesign them with AI, and that brings us to the physical engine beneath the work, where Wednesday's spending figures really reached a new scale. AMD committed up to $5 billion in equity to Anthropic, and AMD also named the lab as its first customer for as much as 2 gigawatts of MI450 capacity running on Helios. At data center scale, 2 gigawatts is roughly a large city's worth of power devoted exclusively to computing. Anthropic's Tom Brown framed the deal as a way to diversify beyond one silicon supplier. Now, that claim fits Anthropic's interests, but the physical commitment gives it weight. NVIDIA still controls an estimated 80 to 90% or so of the AI accelerator market by revenue. AMD's MI450 system offers a credible, frontier-scale alternative. A second supplier doesn't necessarily erase NVIDIA's lead. It breaks the assumption that frontier buyers have only one viable path. Once another path exists, any single vendor starts losing leverage over price, supply, and contract terms. And the other spending figures were even larger. OpenAI raised its stated data center build-out target through 2030 to $750 billion. And it's also acting as lead developer on its first data center. Alphabet increased its planning 2026 capital spending to $205 billion. So the company reported nearly $120 billion in second quarter revenue, which is up 23%. Yet, its free cash flow fell below zero for the first time in a decade. Now, free cash flow is the cash left after a company pays its operating costs and capital spending. Alphabet came in negative by $5.9 billion. Tesla also went cash flow negative by $1.1 billion during that same window. These totals do look like a scoreboard for who can spend the most, and a lot of coverage is going with that particular headline. But that view misses the more important curve underneath them. The data centers are being built for newer chip generations that deliver much more intelligence from the same power and money. NVIDIA's Vera Rubin NVL72 produces roughly 5 times the inference performance per dollar of the earlier GB200 when running DeepSeek R1, for example. It also delivers about 5.4 times the performance per megawatt. Against the newer GB300 baseline, Vera Rubin still lands between 2 and 4 times higher. Part of that jump comes from a 3-bit lookup table tensor core. So today's capital is funding systems that make an earlier unit of intelligence far cheaper. The companies racing to concentrate computing capacity are also paying for the efficiency gains that make useful capacity easier to reproduce later. AMD adds another pressure. Competition now operates at the full rack scale, which means that chips, memory, networking, cooling, and software all work as one single contained system. Now, that wider choice doesn't remove the physical cost, though. New York is considering a data center moratorium. Political polling shows that public resistance to data centers siting is very high. Communities are pushing back against the power demand, the land use, and the infrastructure burden that are arriving with these projects. That resistance is part of the real price of the build-out. Companies have to negotiate those costs with the people and places that will be carrying them. And there's also a component that faster GPUs simply don't solve. AI systems depend on DRAM memory. SK Hynix expects the memory shortage to peak in 2027 and continue well beyond 2030. So a machine can perform each calculation more efficiently, but still sit idle if builders can't obtain enough memory. That supply layer keeps capacity scarce even while the cost per unit of intelligence itself falls. So, the compute race has two directions at once. The spending concentrates enormous physical capacity in a few companies. The systems that money buys have become more efficient in recent generations, and AMD gives buyers a second silicon route. So the contracts seek control. The engineering keeps making that control harder to hold. Shifting away again here, more compute can accelerate a search, but the next paper shows something even deeper. AI can change where the search even begins. Scientists use directed evolution to give proteins new jobs. They let a protein accumulate mutations, and they select the versions that perform better, and then they repeat the cycle. The method borrows evolution's engine and points it toward a chosen function. The trouble is that natural proteins are often only stable enough to do the jobs they already have, so most mutations make them less stable. An enzyme may start learning a useful new function and fall apart before it actually gets there. In a Nature paper published Wednesday, researchers used ProteinMPNN to redesign 3 botulinum proteases. Now, a protease is an enzyme that cuts other proteins at specific places. ProteinMPNN redesigns the enzyme sequence so that it can fold it into a chosen structure. The researchers wanted starting proteins that were more stable while retaining the catalytic ability of the originals. And they tested 74 different designs, and 58 worked as proteases, and 33 cut their targets at least as fast as the natural versions. And then came the real test. The team ran 4 side-by-side evolution campaigns. Some began with the AI redesigned enzymes. Others began with just the natural proteins. The redesigned starting points produced better results in all 4 campaigns. Their extra stability acted like spare capacity. The proteins could absorb mutations that would have destroyed the natural enzyme. That let evolution reach sequences unavailable from the original starting material. The researchers checked that explanation directly, too. They took the winning mutations and grafted them back onto the natural proteins. Those versions failed to function, so the useful mutations only worked because the AI redesign had first created a stronger base for them. The headline result targeted ataxin 2, which is a protein implicated in ALS and other diseases. Starting with an AI redesigned enzyme, the continuous evolution system produced a protease more than 79 times as selective for ataxin 2 as the best version evolved from the natural protein. It was also more efficient and more stable. Selectivity is crucial for a protein-cutting enzyme. A therapeutic protease would need to cut its intended target while leaving other proteins alone. This study doesn't establish a treatment for ALS, but it demonstrates a possible route toward one. The evolution itself also ran through PACE, or phage-assisted continuous evolution. PACE performs dozens of mutation and selection cycles each day without someone manually handling every single round. That combination changes the shape of the experiment. AI strengthens the starting protein. Automated evolution then explores the new paths that strength makes possible. This changes far more than just search speed. It changes which destinations the search can actually reach. Natural evolution handed researchers a starting point shaped by inheritance. ProteinMPNN made that starting point a design choice. AI has begun reshaping the terrain before this evolution process takes its first step. Shifting away again, the science is moving faster because capable systems let fewer human hours reach further. Our final story, though, asks where companies send the gains when that same change reaches work. So let's start with the people losing their livelihoods. Monday.com announced Wednesday that it would eliminate roughly 630 positions. That's about 1/5 of its workforce. The Israeli work management software company said that it would reorganize around what it calls its AI work platform. Monday.com is still growing, and its revenue is rising. In that setting, the layoff reads as a choice to spend less on payroll and more on computing and platform development. Now, a day earlier, Nine Entertainment, out of Australia, moved to cut around 30 journalists from the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. 9 management attributed the contraction to extreme AI disruption in the media business. Those newsrooms had faced financial pressure for years before language models ever arrived. Neither company supplied evidence that AI systems had actually absorbed enough specific work to make the affected roles redundant. And that evidence would identify the tasks that changed, and it might show how much drafting, summarizing, ticket triage, or first-pass reporting has moved to the machines. It would then connect that volume to the positions being removed. Without that link, AI caused this remains a corporate claim. Now, the explanation is useful to the company making it. It signals technological momentum to investors. It turns cost-cutting into a story about future strategy. It also places the decision on an impersonal force instead of the actual managers who chose where the savings would come from. Now, that doesn't mean AI-driven work compression is imaginary, of course. We have clear examples of agents taking on large shares of software implementation. The same systems do let small teams produce what once required many more people. So the capability is obviously real. The choice about how to use the resulting surplus still belongs to organizations. A company can use higher output per person to shrink its payroll, but it can also keep its staff and attempt more work, serve more people, lower prices, or build things that were previously too expensive. Technology expands the available options. It does not select the distribution. The asymmetry with so many of these layoffs is extremely sharp. Monday.com removes an accounting cost. 630 people lose their incomes. 9 cuts around 30 newsroom jobs, and those journalists lose work inside an industry already under long financial strain. Calling the change an AI pivot cannot make that loss impersonal. But there's good news here too, and that is that the claim of AI is becoming easier to test. Stanford's Digital Economy Lab and the California Policy Lab are building ways to distinguish genuine AI-driven displacement from ordinary cost-cutting dressed in AI language. That measurement is useful because public labor statistics haven't been built to show which tasks machines absorbed or whether workers were removed for unrelated financial reasons. Better evidence won't prevent every cut, of course, but it can make the alibi checkable, and it can sharpen the real negotiation ahead, too. The capability creates the surplus, but currently companies are deciding who gets to keep it, and that needs to change. All right, let's bring it to a close for today. Science used to move through a chain of waits. Researchers waited for a specialist's time. Energy projects waited for grid studies. Gene editors waited for safer payloads and smaller delivery systems. Evolving proteins waited for a mutation they could survive. But today's evidence shows those waits are compressing. The Genesis mission takes national lab computing and points it toward research capacity that can be run again and again. Its grid models could eventually turn years of interconnection work into minutes. The gene editing papers move payload, precision, delivery, and therapeutic effect within days of one another. ProteinMPNN goes further by giving evolution a stronger place to begin. That's the answer to who increasingly sets the pace. The clock is moving away from the number of human hours that an institution can spare, and it's moving toward how much capable intelligence researchers can run, how well they can direct it, and how quickly a demonstrated result can enter the real world. The shift remains incomplete. Phase 1 grid models still need validation. Gene editing treatments still need clinical translation. A selective protease aimed at an ALS-linked protein remains a search result. Faster chips still face memory shortages, power demands, and communities that expect a voice in what gets built around them. And labor exposes the largest unfinished part. Scientific capability is widening faster than our arrangements for sharing its gains. Monday.com and 9 show companies pursuing smaller payrolls while offering little evidence that AI itself required those choices. That outcome comes from management and policy. It is not written into the capability itself. The same capacity can clear a queue for community solar. It can help immune cells fight cancer without viral insertion. It can make an editor small enough for one injection. It can open protein paths that inherited biology could not reach. The administration may try to wrap this in American leadership. Companies may treat compute as a private race, but the deeper change exceeds those motives. Manufactured intelligence can multiply the amount of science that humanity is able to attempt. It can loosen the old link between discovery and scarce expert time. Our task is to carry that abundance through the final mile into working grid systems, safe therapies, wider access, and arrangements that let more people share the gain. The pace is accelerating. The future depends on whether access and translation can learn to keep time with it. See you tomorrow.